So today we're going to be talking a little bit about my big problem with Intel, and specifically that problem being I would not recommend a new Intel chip to almost anyone. I say almost because there are exceptions to pretty much everything, but I would not recommend new Intel chips to almost anyone, and I want to tell you why. So Intel's had a little bit of bad press lately. You may have actually noticed this. For one, it is rumored that Apple is looking at making its own processors in the not too distant future. That would hurt Intel's business a little bit. You may have also noticed that Coffee Lake processors, depending on which SKU you're looking for, are very hard to find right now, especially at reasonable prices. I actually have pulled up an i5-8400 here on Amazon going for $260.95, and by the way, I did check, the story is about the same over on Newegg. So if you're looking for an i5-8400, good luck actually finding one. Also, you may have heard their 10 nanometer process is not going very well. There was the rumor recently that it was canceled, and then Intel actually had to issue a release that said, no, it's actually not canceled. They say it's going swimmingly, even though it's something like, I think it's about 2 years overdue. I think originally, their original roadmap to 10 nanometer was supposed to release in 2016, and we're at the tail end of 2018 and looking on towards 2019, and since the 9000 series chips are not 10 nanometer, I'm going to go ahead and guess that it didn't go as well as they thought. And then you may just look at pricing. The 8700K is $370, which, you know, that's about where the top end mainstream chips have always sort of been. But if we go and try to find a 9900K, they are pretty much out of stock everywhere, but if you were able to actually order one right now on Newegg, they would be $580, and I believe last time I looked, Amazon was the same. So right now, Intel is definitely having some supply issues with keeping their chips in stock. And no, I also don't believe that this is a case of them just selling so well that they are completely out of stock already. I actually think this is more of a case of they may have sold well at launch because a lot of people chomping at the bit to upgrade their system, but also I don't think there was actually that many available to begin with. That's why they're probably out of stock in most places. All that news aside though, let's talk about pricing just a little bit, and this is the main sort of reason that I don't really recommend Intel on almost any computer build at all at this point. So actually the reason for not recommending Intel has as much to do with AMD's aggressive pricing as Intel's sort of complete obliviousness to the existence of AMD Ryzen processors. So obviously you're not going to pay $260 for an i5-8400, but maybe you have availability, and maybe you can find something like, let's see if there's an 8600K. And no, there's actually not. But even if you're able to get your hands on an inexpensive-ish Coffee Lake chip, maybe one that's actually priced near MSRP, not like the 8400, there are almost always better AMD equivalents or just better chips overall that are considerably cheaper. So if you were able to find an 8700 for around that $300 price point, which I think is about where they're supposed to be anyways, around $300 though would get you a 2700X at $305, which is a completely unlocked chip, 8 cores and 16 threads, compared to an 8700, which would have 6 cores and 12 threads, but locked at its frequency, you can't overclock that chip. So there's a lot of advantage there that are available to the AMD crowd. If you're going AMD, you're typically going to be able to buy more cores and more threads for the same price. But in addition to that, if you decide that you want 6 cores, 12 threads, so you're going to save money by buying something like a Ryzen 2600, which right now on Amazon is $160. You can reinvest that money into upgrading the other specs in your system, whether it be a better GPU, more RAM, more storage, whatever the case is. You will get more bang for your buck, at least from a gaming perspective, and for most people, from a workflow perspective, you'll get more bang for your buck by, instead of getting a crazy overkill CPU for what you're using it for, get a Ryzen chip and then reinvest that money in better specs somewhere else in your system. And this is really the gist of where AMD is beating out Intel, at least in my mind, and I think probably in a lot of people's minds right now that are thinking about building a system. Every time I go over to PC Part Picker to sort of put together a system that I would recommend building myself, that if given a certain price point, or a certain dollar amount, if I was putting together a system, I almost always immediately gravitate towards AMD. And sure, you could definitely accuse me of being an AMD fanboy. I started my first ever build was an AMD system. I did briefly go to a Haswell-based Intel system for my main rig, but then ever since then, I've been using my 1800X as my main system, or at least as my main in my main system. But the reason for that is mostly just because I am getting more than the performance I need, and I'm able to spend the money I save elsewhere. Meanwhile, the Intel counterpart CPUs, so when I got the 1800X, I believe the best thing that was out there for Intel was either the 6700K or the 7700K. Those are 4-core 8-thread parts. And I had an 8-core 16-thread part. And for video rendering, obviously, the 8-core 16 threads had a heavy benefit, and obviously Intel has sort of caught up on core and thread counts since then, but I spent a lot less money than I would have spent, even at the time, that I would have been to get a high-end desktop platform that could support 8 cores and 16 threads on the Intel side of things. AMD, even from the very beginning, has presented a better value than the Intel systems, and that's continued, if not gotten worse, in the recent year or so because of the shortcomings of the supply lines for Intel. And to get a little bit anecdotal here, I actually just got a high refresh rate, 165 Hz, 1440p G-Sync panel. And I've been playing Overwatch as well as a little bit of Black Ops 4, which the game code came with the monitor. I wouldn't have bought it by myself, but since it was a free game for me, why not? And those games have both run at around 130 to 150 FPS, and Overwatch in particular was just completely maxed out settings. So I would get very little gains as a gamer by moving to an Intel system. Sure, if I had an 8700K that was overclocked in this system, it would run the games at a faster FPS because my limiting factor for those games is probably not the 1080 Ti. It is probably being limited at least a little bit by the Ryzen 1800X. But at 130, 140, 150 FPS, the returns on that investment are very, very minimal. And for video rendering and the other multi-threaded workloads that I use my computer for, I'm getting a big benefit from the Ryzen chips because for the same price, again, you're just getting way more cores, way more threads. So to kind of cut myself off here before I continue rambling, the big problem for Intel right now, their prices are not in line with the market at all. And it's weird because we have a market that is dominated by 2 companies, at least with x86 processors. And right now, it's a clear-cut choice for me. If I was recommending to anyone, and I do mean almost anyone, with the one exception, I mentioned an exception, the one exception is people that can benefit from heavily single-threaded workflows, that you can really take a benefit from the Intel's higher IPCs, and especially if you get an unlocked chip, you can run at really high clock speeds. Then you may want to get an Intel unlocked processor and overclock it. Something like an 8350K, where you could overclock a single core or even a couple of cores to like 5 gigahertz, 5.1, 5.2, because you may have something that's heavily single-threaded, then sure, Intel may be the choice. But for the vast majority of everyone that just needs a generally good CPU for gaming, for your work, whatever the case is, I would recommend Ryzen pretty much every time because it's available, A, and B, it's available at a much, much cheaper price than the performance you're paying for, dearly paying for, on the Intel side of things. And I think that's the big problem for Intel right now is they just can't get their manufacturing sorted out, and because their manufacturing can't get sorted out, they just can't compete with AMD on price right now. But of course, I'm going to kick it back to you guys. What do you think about the current pricing, especially of the new Intel chips, but even the 8000 series, which for the most part are kind of MIA right now if you're not talking about the 8700K or the very low-end 8100. What do you think about the current situation here, and how do you think Zen 2 is going to affect our current sort of situation with the CPU side of things? Do you think AMD is going to actually take a huge market leap forward, or do you think Intel's going to come back? Let us know down below. And of course, if you like the video, give it a like, share, subscribe, comment. All those things help out a lot. You can follow me on Instagram and on Twitter at Hoosier Hardware. And as always, I'll let YouTube queue up a couple more videos from my channel for you to watch. I'm Shane with Hoosier Hardware, and I'll see you guys in the next video.